All right, I got to leave this thing plugged in. I don't have enough juice on it. Hang on. All right, so Chapter 1 is basically just an introduction to security. We're going to talk about Security 101, the very basics. You're going to hear this term a whole lot in all the security classes. Those of you that are in CEH after this are going to hear it again today. The CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility. And that's just a way to kind of look at threats. One thing that we start talking about in this class, and then you really will follow up in future classes, is think like a hacker. If you're going to secure a system, the number one way to secure a system is to know how someone would break into it. If you can think the way that you would break into it, that's the way to secure something. And we're going to talk about threat actor types and attributes. These are the types of attackers. Because of software that is very useful to help defend things, that same software can also be used to break into things. A prime example, Kali Linux. Kali Linux is one of the greatest pieces of software ever made. You can use it to test your own system, to test your vulnerabilities. However, it's free on the internet. I can download it and run it against anybody's computer and see what vulnerabilities they have. So that's where it comes to thinking like a hacker. If you can do something to protect it, that means they can probably do the same thing to try to break into it. So what really is information security? Information security is really just the act of protecting data from some kind of unauthorized access or unlawful modification or disruption or destruction. And that becomes more important. It's not just stopping access to the data. You've also got to make sure somebody doesn't modify it. Let's take a crazy example. If I'm Coca-Cola, okay, my biggest piece of information is probably going to be the recipe. Maybe my competitor doesn't want to steal the recipe. Maybe they're going to break in and change the amount of sugar that's in it or something crazy like that so that I make my recipe wrong. That is really more detrimental in a way than somebody stealing it from me. So you not only have got to protect data from access, you've got to protect it from being modified. Typically, this is an in-depth plan on how to secure data, computers, and networks. So in really defining the importance of the following, protecting information and then preventing modifications, just like I said. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the roles of a security administrator. In the old days, and it's funny because, now I say old days, but really old days is just 5 years ago now. You had a network admin at a place of business, and they were the everything guy. They were the security person and probably the database administrator, and they're the ones that went out and fixed the desktops, and they were also the ones that ran the server. Nowadays, because things have become so much more complex, larger networks will have people who have specific roles to certain things. Like it is not uncommon for there to be a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, and their sole job is to deal with the security of a network, not really the administration of it. When you get into larger data centers, you'll have entire teams that work on one thing. Just for example, when we went to State Farm a couple of years ago in Illinois and looked at their data center, they have teams of people whose sole job it is to do one thing. Like you may have firewall people, and they do nothing but firewalls. Their job is to set up firewalls to protect servers all day, every day. You'll have people who focus on just Windows Server, maybe even just specific things on Windows Server. Like my whole job might be Active Directory. My whole job is determining how we're going to roll Active Directory out to get everybody rolled into it. So that's going to take us to the CIA triad, and I'm going to go ahead and hit all three so we can see them together. The CIA triad is a concept you're going to hear a lot about, and it deals with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality means that we're going to keep that information from going to someone that shouldn't have it. Integrity means we make sure it's reliable. Not only is it reliable on the server, but this also includes is it reliable when it's transmitted. basically there's a term we talk about a lot, data at rest. Data should be encrypted basically anytime it's not used. It ought to be encrypted on the server. It ought to be encrypted in transit. The only time it maybe shouldn't be encrypted is when it's on the screen and somebody's reading it. And then availability means that that data is available to you. You know, that is, how is it stored? How is it accessed? Do we have redundant servers so that we can get to it if one's down? Here they're just kind of graphically showing that whole idea of the CIA triad. I normally see this drawn as like a triangle, you know, with confidentiality, integrity, and then availability. Another thing that you'll hear a lot about is AAA. And AAA is authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authentication is, you know, when somebody's identity is established, how is it confirmed with a system? The most typical type of this is password. Y'all all have a password to get onto your computers, you know, your email. That's just a single type of authentication. Authorization is when you're given access to certain data areas or, you know, physical authorization like to a door in a building. Authorization is different from authentication because first I want to know who you are, and from that then I'm going to determine what access you have. I'm jumping ahead because I know there's a whole chapter coming up on it, but generally on a network you use what's called the process of least privilege. What that means is I'm only going to give you enough access to do your job. I'm not going to make you an admin on my computer. Why? So you can't go install coupon printer and get a virus on it. I'm only going to give you the absolute minimum you need to do your job. This is why faculty are not admins on their own computers here. And I know, you know, it aggravates me as a faculty member, but on the other hand, coming from IT like I did, I wouldn't give faculty access to their own computers because that's how you screw up. The trade-off is, do you have the resources to handle that? Because since faculty are not admins on their machines, they can't even install a printer. So anytime they need a new printer, they have to call IT services and they got to go out and load the drivers because they can't do it. It's the trade-off you always have to juggle. You know, keeping the access is good, but do you have the resources to actually handle that? And then accounting is the tracking of data, the usage, and the network resources. Generally, accounting you can almost think of as an audit. With secure systems especially, you're normally going to have auditing on the files so that you know who accessed that data, when they accessed it, where they accessed it from. And a lot of times with databases, you'll even have a journal. What did they change? Those really come into play if you've had some unauthorized access because you might can go back through the journal and do what's called a rollback to get the data back to what it originally was if they've changed something. So some common security threats, malicious software, malware, you know, viruses, worms, Trojan horses, rootkits, ransomware, adware. Adware is a big one, you know. A lot of people get struck by that, just basically anything unwanted. The issues of these go beyond an individual computer these days. A lot of these adwares will get on your machine, and then their sole purpose is for your computer to take part in some other threat. Like, how many of y'all know what a distributed denial of service attack is? All right, making it real simple terms, what a DDoS attack is where you have a bunch of computers that try to hit a website at the same time and just request data over and over and over. Or they hit a DNS server and request data over and over and over to the point that it gets overloaded and can't respond to real requests. One or two computers can't do this, but if I can get a piece of malware out there that gets me, say, 100,000 computers to be part of my little botnet to do this, then I can shut down a website. I'll remind y'all last semester, do y'all remember the first of last semester when our internet went down here for a day and a half? That's because Lonnie, our network, they were experiencing a distributed denial of service attack from somewhere in China. Shut down the whole state. So those are things you have to watch for. Unauthorized access means that you got access to something without the consent of the owner. If I have accidentally made you an admin on a machine and I shouldn't have, As an admin on a Windows machine, for example, you can read the user files in any other directory. Even if that user has made their files encrypted, you can take ownership of them and still read them. It's just it's a design. So, that's why, again, you don't want people to be the admin if they don't need to be. A system failure, these things happen. These are lumped in with security threats because of the availability that's lost. If you lose a hard drive and there's not a backup, you've lost your data. If you're not doing RAID and backups, as an admin, if you're not doing backups, you need to be fired to begin with. But, those are things that happen. What's your plan for a system failure? And then my favorite, social engineering. This one is really becoming a lot more popular. Why try to gain access to the system remotely if I can get, the secretary to let me in the room where the server is? Or, other things like that, just ways to get access to data. So the way you handle all of this is with security controls. And we've got really three major types of security controls. A physical control is something that's going to watch you, like a camera. We got the camera like in the corner here. ID cards can be a physical control. How many of y'all have used the 24-hour lab? You have to put your ID to come into the building. That's a physical control. When we get into more security, this might be security guards. There is a concept that you use in a secure system called a man trap, where you have a door that goes into an area with another door, and the doors are tied together such that both can't be open at one time. And generally, you use an access card to get into one door. Then if it's a true secure system, there's probably a guard standing there, usually with a large gun, who's going to see that you are who you are before you get into the other room. And, the whole idea behind that is you're trapped. So if you've gotten that far and can't get on, they've got you. A technical control is something that keeps access to a system. An access control list. For those of you that have had Cisco before or had the, some of the stuff in networking, we talk about ACLs, ways that you lock things down. A smart card can also be a type of access control. If any of you have been in the military, the card you have to use to access the system, that CAT card, that is a smart card. And that contains the encryption and the authentication for that. And then an administrative control is a policy. This is basically what I have in place for if something happens, what we're going to do. Normally, these are disaster recovery plans, contingency plans as well. These will be things like, if you're a medium to a large size company, you'll have a formal plan of, okay, if my data gets in, somebody gets into my data, pardon me, this is what we'll do. This is who needs to be called. You'll also have a disaster recovery plan. If this happens, this is who we notify, and this is how we're going to get back up in business. I don't know here, for example, because I'm not involved in the, the IT stuff here as much. But I was at LSUS. Our disaster recovery plan was in line with BIPSI. And basically the idea was that we had set up a plan. We kept a copy of our data weekly over there on their servers. They kept a copy of their stuff weekly with us. If something were to happen and all the buildings at LSU would have burned to the ground the same day, the plan was everybody would go to BIPSI. And within a few days' time, we could have at least a backup from a week ago running over there. We were their backup as well, same thing. If something happened and all the buildings at BIPSI burned to the ground, we had their data so they could come over. But that's a formal plan, writing it and planning what you're going to do. There is a company in Shreveport called Venue Security that's what they do. They do disaster recovery plans. You set up your servers and you make copies of your servers onto their server virtually, and you pay them, like a monthly subscription. But if your server goes down or you have a fire or something in your data center, they become your temporary data center until you get back up and running. So those are, things that you can do. So how do we mitigate all these threats? The number one thing is user awareness. Security is often talked about as being a chain. You'll probably hear me say this in every chapter, security chain. And think about like a chain. A chain is only as strong as the weakest link on that chain. The truth is, no matter what you do, the weakest link on a security chain is almost always people. I can come up with your password's going to be 26 characters and 3 of them have to be uppercase and 2 letters can't be in a row and it's got to have an exclamation mark and a comma and a period in it. Okay, that sounds awesome. That sounds like a great password. You're probably going to write it down. And if you're not a security person, you're going to write it down on a sticky note. And you're either going to put it on the side of your monitor, or if you're kind of worried about security, you're going to put it under your keyboard because nobody would ever look there for a password. I've got this great security plan, and you just broke it, because of one thing. So part of it is making sure your users understand. Part of it is also making a plan that your users can actually stick to. I love the idea of a 26-character password with all of those. Nobody's ever going to remember it. That's going to get written down. It is probably more secure for me to have a 9-character password that requires an upper and, a symbol, because that's something people might be able to actually remember. So you have to play around with those things. You also have to have training on things that your users just need to be careful with. Security awareness emails. The truth is, no matter how good your spam system is, spear phishing emails get through every once in a while. One came through to the faculty here just a few days ago saying, "We're the administration, change your password. Send me your password, we're going to change it." People do that. And this is where I get very careful. I don't like to call people dumb. I'm going to say they're ignorant of security. Because these are, for the most part, intelligent, educated people. They have no concept of that can happen. That email didn't, it says admin on there, admin at NSULA. That obviously came from the admin at NSULA. It's foreign to them that that's not the case. They don't get it. So having these trainings to make sure that your users know not to do that are very important. And if you don't, cleaning up after a mess can take a very long time. When I was at BIPSI, before I came down here, we had an email slip through the system, and one of our English teachers, I won't name any names, I'll just blame it on the English department, I like to do that anyway, they clicked on the message, and they sent their email password, and then the next day, the university closed for Christmas. BIPSI was a spam relay for 2.5 weeks before anybody noticed it. We sent out about 4 million emails. We got blacklisted on everything, including Gmail. So you could send an email from BIPSI to somebody Gmail, and it went in their spam folder. Our admins had to clean all of that up, and it took them a long time, all because somebody saw an email and responded to it. And the person who did it, I know really well, they honestly thought, "Oh, this is from admin. This is what I should do." We tend to take that for granted as computer people because we all know better. If any of you replied to something like that, I'm going to fail you in this class to begin with. But people outside of our area really, they don't get it. And then authentication is always important. Generally, authentication gets broken up into 5 categories. Something a user knows, a password or a PIN. Something a user has, like a smart card to access the system. Something the user is, that's something like their fingerprint or a retina scan, or something along those lines. Something the user does, that might be a written signature. They're making extreme strides with what a user does now. In fact, I read an article not too long ago about a system that is currently in development that would watch the mouse on a user's screen all the time the user's on it. And based off of previous heuristics, after it's watched a person for a few months, it can kind of anticipate whether it's really them or not on the system after they're logged in, because we all kind of move things the same way. It's kind of like handwriting analysis. That's not really security, but I'm fascinated by that. We all kind of write the same way. Even when you try to not write the same way, you write the same way, which is how they catch a lot of stuff like that. And then finally, somewhere a user is, like a GPS location. I'm jumping ahead, but we will talk about authentication factors later. And the way you make a system more secure is by using more than one of these. For example, maybe I'll allow you to have a 4-character password, but in addition to that, I want your fingerprint. Now my system is secure because you've got to have your fingerprint and you need the 4-character password. This is why you generally wouldn't do just a smart card. You know, like getting in the building here, you can use the smart card to get in. It would be infinitely more secure if you had to use that and then you had to have a PIN code on top of it. Because with just your ID, that's great, but let's say you drop yours on the ground, I can pick it up and I can get in the building, and now I'm logged as you. So that's the key to that. So other ways to mitigate threats, anti-malware software. You know, there's no reason to not have antivirus on a machine these days. Even the Windows 10 built-in one's not bad. I personally, I'm a fan of Avast and of anti-malware bytes. Doesn't matter what you use, you just should have one and keep it updated. What's the university using now? They're using Bitdefender now. It was Norton for a while. A lot of the software that you use at home, there will be enterprise versions that allow you as the admin to control it. Like I'm certain, I don't know a lot about Bitdefender, but I know with Norton you could remotely update it and all this. I'm assuming Bitdefender is probably the same way. And since you're not admins on your computer, the admin can control that. You don't have the option to not update your antivirus. They're going to do it for you. That's how you keep things out of your system. Data backups. You know, you really need to have backups. You need to have a backup plan, and you should test it. At minimum, you ought to do, some kind of tape backup, and then I would suggest take it off-site. Because the internet is becoming so much more powerful and there's more bandwidth available, lots of places do online backups now. Like you can back up stuff to Iron Mountain. Just even as a home user, how many of y'all use OneDrive or Dropbox or something like that, Mega? See, I strongly encourage everybody to do that. I use Dropbox. I've been a fan of it for a long time. And the truth is, I don't back up my system at home, but everything that's truly critical to me is in Dropbox. Now, if my machine at home, if I got home today and the hard drives were crashed, it would stink and it would take me a while to reload everything and download everything. But everything I truly need is in Dropbox. I wouldn't lose anything that's really important to me. It would just be re-downloading software and reinstalling it. It might be a pain, but it wouldn't be impossible. Encryption. Encryption is something that you just should use. This is where you make it so that the data is unreadable to anybody that doesn't have the key to the data. Home, maybe, maybe not. The trade-off is speed. But if you have a laptop and you're carrying it around, I would strongly encourage you to encrypt the whole thing. That way, somebody finds it, they can't get into it or get any of the data off of it without your key. And then another important piece is data removal. People forget about this. When you, as a business, if you're doing away with a device, you need to clean that device off. And, this goes beyond just computers these days. There are lots of devices that might be on your network that have memory that should be cleared. As a random piece to go to this that I'd never thought about, I read an article last year where a guy with a security firm went into a company that repurposes copiers. Most of these copiers now, they're digital. They take a scan and then print it. They're not analog. They don't print as they go. Well, they've got memory. And he got some Xerox copiers from one of these places. And a lot of the bigger, like enterprise-level copiers will have a hard drive in them so that you can scan, like 300 sheets and make a copy at one time. Well, the way that data is stored on there is essentially a PDF. He took the hard drive out of that copier, figured out what the file system was, and ran some forensics on it, and realized that copier had come from a credit card company. He had credit card names, socials, all this information, and it came off a copier. Now, we all kind of know to clean a computer off, like the school's got a policy on sanitizing a machine before it goes to Baton Rouge to be done away with. But you got to think beyond that now. You got to think about devices. Most of these cameras, they've got 2 weeks worth of memory on them. You should clear that stuff unless before you do away with anything. So data removal is every bit as important as making sure your data is retrievable. So the types of hackers you deal with, there are really three major ones: a white hat, a black hat, and a gray hat. A white hat is a non-malicious person. Um, for example, if I am going to hack into my own system, I'm going to be a white hat. I want to see if I can find the places. A black hat is somebody who tries to break in without authorization. These are the people that kind of, live in that little gray area and might sell your information on the dark web if they get it. And then gray hats are people who are sort of in the middle. Interestingly enough, one of the conferences I like to go to is called Black Hat, but most of the people at it are actually gray hats. These are what used to be the traditional type of hacker. No, I don't want to break anything. I just want to see that I can do it. I'm going to break into this system, and I'm not going to change anything. I just want to see that I can do it. That's where the gray hats kind of come into play. Another two type they talk about are blue hats and elites. A blue hat is someone who hacks into a system, but the organization doesn't employ them. This might be somebody. This is kind of a new term too. I've never heard it called a blue hat before today. These are your pen testers. Maybe I decide this is the stuff I really like doing for a living, and you're company X over here, and you think you've got a good system, and as an admin, you kind of want this. I'm going to ask you to hack into it. I'm probably not going to tell you anything about my system. You see if you can do it, because if I'm running this system, it's kind of like writing a paper. You know how you'll write a paper and you'll miss a spelling error or grammar because you've read it so many times it makes sense to you. That's the whole idea here, having somebody else look at it and see if they can break in. And because they're blue hats and you've got some room there. And then elites are the ones who first find the vulnerabilities. These are the people that are really kind of on the cutting edge finding this stuff. You read something about like a zero-day attack on a Windows server, which a zero-day means that there's no fix for it. This is a hack that's gotten out in the wild, and the company hasn't written a patch for it yet. Usually with those 0 days, that's why you see patches come out for Windows right after them, because that whole company has gotten on the ball, and they know they got to fix this right now because it's a problem. Those tend to be what they call the elite hackers. There's not very many of them, but they're the ones you really got to watch for. So other types, we have something these days called a script kiddie. And I've always thought that's kind of a funny term, but basically, I mentioned Kali Linux earlier. Kali's awesome, and it's a good way to learn this stuff. But it has all these scripts built into it that will attack a system, and you really don't have to have very much knowledge to do it. This really falls more for the CEH class, but I'll share it with y'all as well. There is a website called VulnHub, V-U-L-N-H-U-B, and VulnHub has all of these pre-built virtual machines on it that have vulnerabilities built into them on purpose. You can download them and run them so you can explore a vulnerability. Like a very basic type of vulnerability is called an SQL injection. And that's where you basically are able to send SQL code commands through a database, and the database responds to them. Well, there are plenty of images on there that are built that will accept those. And they're done on purpose. That's a whole great little area for you to go play with. If you get into that stuff, I strongly encourage you guys to go look at that. But a lot of that is script kiddie things, because those are things that you can easily do with very little knowledge. Hacktivist is a term they use to apply to different activities. Hacking for social change, hacking to promote political agendas, to full-blown cyber terrorism. That all kind of falls under the hacktivist area these days. Because so many things now besides just computers are connected to networks, hacktivists can be, terrorists that attack things that aren't in the sense that we would think of as data. A prime example is the power grid. I will tell you, the power grid in our country is extremely fragile. People don't realize how fragile it is. There are lots of pieces of the power grid in the United States that still run on Windows 3.1.1. And the people who wrote the software that runs this stuff are dead. So you know what? It runs and people don't touch it and it's all great. But one day it's going to come crashing down. So, that's just the way it is. You also have organized crime groups now. We all know about the dark web and, things that go on there, but there's money to be made in this, unfortunately. And because of that, organized crime gets involved in it. In the highlights of the Silk Road, for example, there were places where you could go on there and use Bitcoin to buy drugs, and they would email you GPS coordinates where a drone was going to go drop a package for you to go pick up. And with it being Bitcoin, it was all pretty anonymous. And then another one is an advanced persistent threat. And these are usually covert sources of intelligence. This is getting into the area of like a government spying on a government. I do not get big on the whole conspiracy theory, and we can all pretend all we want, but every government that has any kind of technology spies on every other government that has technology, and it's just going to be that way. We can say whatever we want. We can say the United States doesn't spy on everybody or anybody, but they spy on everybody, and everybody spies on them at the same time. It's just it's the nature of the beast these days. Information is power. That's the bottom line. It's just as valuable as money. And if I know what you're doing, then I have more information. I have more power. So one of the labs that y'all can look at. If y'all have not done this, go look at the Security Plus objectives. Make sure you're looking at the 501 ones on CompTIA's site. You've seen them before. I put them on the syllabus. Those are the objectives just line for line from what's on the CompTIA. Things that you can look at that we can talk about here after I stop this, the length of the exam, the amount of the questions. There are going to be multiple choice questions. I'll say this over and over, but I'll put it here so that it's on the recording. You have time. Read the questions carefully because they will let you make answers that don't fit the question. The question may say pick the two that fit the most. It will let you pick one. It will let you pick three. Be careful with it. Luckily, as of the 401, and maybe this is different for y'all, but I hope not, there were none of the above choices. So all the questions had a right answer. There weren't any of these, no, this could not be. And then you're going to get the performance-based questions. Those are going to be the ones where they're going to have you do something in a lab, like turn on Defender or whatever it is. Your passing score on it, the maximum you can make on this exam is a 900. I don't know why they picked 900. The lowest you can make is a 200. They won't share any of that with us. A passing score is a 750. So you need a 750 out of a 900, which somebody do the math. That's what, about 80%, give or take a little bit. I'm going to go with that. I'm not a math person. So that's what you need to pass the exam. Then there are, when y'all are reading at the end of the chapter, there are 5 true-false questions and 5 multiple-choice questions that you can kind of take a look at. So basically, read Chapter 1 if you haven't. They're going to go into more detail on everything I just went into. You'll notice that I set it up where on Moodle, after you do the reading of each section, you can click it off. That is really more for your benefit than mine. I'll look in on it occasionally to make sure you're reading, but I left that there so you can click off the sections you've done. I also did that so that if you're having trouble with a lab, like I know a lot of y'all had trouble with the first lab, that's fine. Just don't click it, but don't spend a lot of time on it. You got a lot to go over. Go on to the other ones, and you can go back to it later. It is not even super important to me that you do things in order. I mean, all this stuff is kind of set up, and I'm going to lecture in order. But if you want to jump ahead or jump back or whatever, that's really fine. The bottom line is at the end, you need to go over everything because all of this is going to be on the exam. As long as you've covered it all and you feel like you are, you're good to go, that's all that's going to matter to me.